Are we recording?
Yeah.
Shit. Okay, come on.
How's it going?
Great.
What's going on here?
It's nice to be here.
Right?
Free world. I love it. I'm incredibly energized about things, and I know that a lot of people have maybe some negative things to say about where we are and what's going on, but when I think about the whole world situation and I look at the U.S., you know, the multiculturalism in this country has fueled kind of a dynamic situation in our society and our economy where we're much more productive than the nations that don't have that kind of diversity going on. It is an incredibly productive society. And so, a couple of years ago, I started a company called ProImpact Group. And what I was doing was putting together my best practices for college admissions and career development for career and technical ed, geared for high school students that maybe weren't aware of just how much potential and the abundance of opportunity that's around them. You know, social media allows everyone to see into a business or to see into a student's world. It's quite possible for students to make really advanced moves as a high school student. And so, but I'm also aware that, a lot of first gen students might be living in a community and have a situation where they're basically going from home to school and then back to home. And a lot of these students may not have a huge frame of reference. However, I've been working with first gen students now for about 5 years and quite extensively, and they are incredibly capable and desirous of taking on new roles and doing new things. And so, ProImpact Group, as I mentioned, we're developing resources for high school students that whether you're, college bound or you're involved in an academy, like a career and technical ed academy, might be culinary or automotive or engineering, you get an opportunity to start taking steps along that career path that leads you to what your future might be, and it's something that we're very passionate about. We have a lot of fun doing it, and we hope that we're encouraging students and helping them take that first step. I did work in the Asia Pacific region for about 25 years, where I was helping American companies to get established and create markets for their products in Asia. And there's a lot of opportunity there. American companies have a great reputation abroad, and many companies are taking advantage of that. But smaller and medium-sized companies may not have as much of an aggressive attitude as they could as far as tapping markets in the Asia Pacific region. And that's where, the multicultural aspects of the United States really can come into play. Companies can find students, whether they're Korean, Japanese, from Taiwan, Philippines, you name it, right in many of the high schools within probably 5 miles of your company headquarters. So, these students are very savvy, and they know a lot about, in many cases, they know a lot about the language and the culture and the markets. So it's something that American companies can reach out and tap. 我告诉你，我的会讲国语的朋友们，非常高兴跟你聊天一下。那么我知道美国跟中国的关系不是太好了，可是美国人跟中国人很好，所以我们不要忘记这个，这是最重要的。Okay, so that's pretty.
Wow, I don't even know what that was. What did you say?
I just said, hey, Chinese friends out there, I know relations between China and the U.S. aren't that good, but relations between Americans and Chinese people are very good. So that is my motto right now. So just want to let all the Chinese speaking people out there hear a little bit of positivity.
I love it. I love it. I wish I could understand.
In high school, I got very interested in Chinese and Japanese history, and started studying a little language, and then got a bachelor's degree at George Washington University, and I racked up over 30 credits of Chinese at GW. But the real big help that I had was going to Taiwan. I was only there for 8 months, but in 8 months, I learned more Chinese than I learned in over 2 years studying intensively in the U.S. So I really enjoyed Taiwan, and that was in the 80s, and Taiwan, has just become much more dynamic a country ever since then. But it was a lot of fun when I was there, and the people were very welcoming, and so I also did business worked in Hong Kong, and I've done a lot of business in China and throughout Asia. People may not realize it, but if you're running around Asia to places like Malaysia and Indonesia and the Philippines, maybe 10 or 20% of the population or less would be ethnic Chinese, but they do a lot of business there. So they that 10, 20% of the population runs 80 or 90% of the economy. And so there's a lot of Chinese speaking business people that are very active throughout Southeast Asia. And Taiwan was an independent place, that had immigrants from mainland China throughout history. And there was quite a bit in the mid 18th century. But the real changes took place after the Communist Revolution in China. When the communists took over China, about 2 million mainland Chinese escaped to Taiwan. And what they did is they brought a lot of the gold bullion from the country and a lot of the treasures. So there's a museum in Taipei that has one of the largest collections of art of any museum in the world, and they have 5,000 years of Chinese art in the National Palace Museum in Taipei, and that was brought over by the ex-Kuomintang. As they fled, they lost control. They were very corrupt, and they lost control and fled to Taiwan. When I was a student throughout the 80s and the 90s, studying Chinese history, I was always like, well, maybe Taiwan should go back to China. But here's the thing about it. When Nixon negotiated with Mao in 1972, Nixon had a kind of disposition to talk about Taiwan, and he was prepared to turn over Taiwan. And Mao was very coy. Mao was like, no, we'll talk about that later. Chinese have a long-term view. And so what Mao was really doing was a little bit more insidious. He was actually planting seeds for the communists to sort of do what they do best and undermine the U.S. And that was his game. And so I think Mao and the CCP had their chance to take Taiwan, and they kind of screwed it. And now the way I look at it is Taiwan is a democratic nation. China is an authoritative, totalitarian nation. And, frankly, I think, mainland China could take a couple pages out of Taiwan's playbook right now. It is a very well-run nation of, a fraction of the population of mainland China, but they're doing things right. And whereas the Communist Party in China is not. And when you look at personal freedoms, there's complete freedom in Taiwan. But when you look at it in mainland China, in China itself, every individual has a score. It's like a personal online patriotism score. It's kind of like a FICO score. and it is built up according to your online activity and how much you're patriotic towards, I don't know, the Communist Party. And so that affects your ability and your kids' ability to get into college, your ability to get a mortgage. You know, what kind of society runs that way? To me, it's like it's like anathema to freedom and stuff. Taiwan is the opposite. And so I would put my money on Taiwan, and I think the Chinese people would even like to get a little bit more freedom in their own country. I don't see why their system taking over Taiwan makes any sense whatsoever. So my whole idea about Taiwan has evolved, and like I said, at one point I really was in favor. And you know, in the early '90s, something like I remember a public opinion poll. There was like over 60% of the population of Taiwan favored unification with China. And there were reasons for that. And you know, Deng Xiaoping had a method of governance in China where it wasn't authoritarian and there was, you know, government by committee. That's not the case in China today. And the people in Taiwan are not interested in being part of what the CCP has cooking over there in mainland China. So I'm definitely supportive of the people of Taiwan for that regard. And I'm supportive of the people of mainland China too. I hope they get a better shake. So Micronesia is a tropical paradise that consists of 7 island groups. And I'm not going to go into each one because it'll make your head spin, but they are all distinct. And when you go to these different 7 island groups, you might go to an island group that has thousands of islands. And of those thousands of islands, you know, maybe there's a handful that are inhabited. But all those islands have their own distinct culture. And then you go to another island group, and that's a whole nother like race of people and culture. So you have the Carolinians, you have Chamorros. Then you have a mixture of other cultures because this Micronesian region, which by the way has the same geographic footprint as the United States. So if you superimpose a map of the United States over these 7 island groups in Micronesia, it's the same area. And over the years, they were colonized by first the Spanish, then the Germans, then the Japanese. And since World War II, the U.S. has had a major role in most of these island groups, except 2. 2 are not aligned with the U.S., but all other 5 are very aligned with the United States. And, you know, it's a wondrous region, beautiful tropical islands that are unspoiled. And, you know, interestingly, when you look at all of the Pacific Island nations, and there are 23 Pacific Island islands, the Micronesian islands are the closest to East Asia. So from most Micronesian islands, you can get to Tokyo, Seoul, Taipei in 3 hours. And it's interesting. I mean, these islands, I call them the Caribbean of the East Asia because East Asians are very productive. They love to travel and they like to take short and long vacations. And so they haven't really developed as tourism destinations. They did for a period of time, but Guam is more like a mass market tourism destination in Micronesia, that Guam. But a lot of the other islands haven't. And there's a mixture of reasons. It's very complicated, but these islands all have incredible potential as tourism destinations, but they haven't all reached their potential. I would love to see an easy to implement mechanism that eliminates corruption. In my lifetime of traveling around the world and working in different places, living in different places, corruption is the big difference maker. If you show me a country or a location that is not that desirable and people don't have a great opportunity in life, 9 times out of 10, there's endemic corruption in that place. And I would love to I would love to see an easy to implement mechanism. I don't know what it would be, but that's a good question, and that's my best answer. The corruption eliminator pill.
Right. You and the rest of the world would love that, except for the corrupt.
Even they don't have a good time, I don't think.
No.
I really don't. I know that it could be fun for a while, but over time, corruption is just like, it's ugly, it's evil, it makes you feel like shit. I don't know. I don't think I don't think it works for anybody.
Right.
I went into a coffee shop in Georgetown. I was working in DC, in Georgetown, outside DC, and I ran into a guy who was kind of in his way famous. His name was Michael Deaver. And we started chatting, and we sat down for almost an hour. And Michael Deaver was the deputy chief of staff for Ronald Reagan. And this guy was so generous and so, this was in 1992-ish, 93 maybe. And he had gone through legal problems, and Ronald Reagan offered him a pardon, and he declined it because he says, I want to suffer. He ran into a little bit of maybe corruption issues in his career working in D.C., and he was suffering the consequences. And he denied a pardon because he said he didn't want to get bailed out. He wanted to face justice if he had to. And what he said to me was, he says, hey, what are you doing? At the time, I was working in the government, and I had this kind of interesting job taking American companies around the world to invest in developing countries. And he said, he told me, he says, listen, don't spend your whole life sitting behind a desk, turning into boiled cabbage, working for the government. He says, go out there and innovate, do something entrepreneurial. And so on his advice, I went out, got an MBA, and I started a kind of a hybrid consulting firm to help American companies do business in Asia. And that was kind of the start of my whole career in entrepreneurial endeavors. But it was on Michael Deaver's advice. And then, a couple years later, I was working in an organization in LA, an awesome NGO, and I was on the board, and I had access to see who were the people donating. Michael Deaver was the largest donator to this NGO, single individual, person making donations. And, he passed away about, I think about 10 years ago, 12 years ago. But I remember that guy fondly. And so I always seek to, to be entrepreneurial, but also to give back the way he did. Like, he was a high level guy when I met him, and he didn't need to talk to me, but he definitely gave me a lot of his time and advice. And I try to sort of reciprocate that kind of attitude and help young people develop their careers. It's kind of one of the things that I do. So cheers to Michael Deaver.
Nice. Now, career, that sounded like pretty cool, working overseas, doing all that stuff. I've heard some stories, but if you could just tell like one of your favorite stories from working at OPEC, like maybe you got like, I don't know, some Tongan baskets, or like, could you tell the story about the piece of the Berlin Wall that you brought home one time, or like, what was that like, if you had an interesting story?
So, all right.
If you can.
I'm going to try to do this quick. So I actually had the opportunity to be in East Germany a couple months before unification. And, the West and the East were going to unify. The Berlin Wall was coming down. The Soviet Empire was collapsing. The Eastern European nations, like East Germany and Poland and Czechoslovakia, they were all experiencing the disintegration of the ruble. Their economies were based on the ruble, and their economies weren't doing well. That was part of the reason the wall came down. And OPEC, I was with an organization called OPEC. We were going in to try to bring American investors to the eastern part of Germany. And I wound up visiting Leipzig, Dresden, Dresden. What was the other city? Well, outside of Dresden, they took me to this tractor factory. And the general manager was very upset. He had 5,000 people on the payroll, and he said, I don't know how I'm going to make payroll next week. Please bring us an American investor. And you know, the U.S. Embassy was coordinating my visits, and they drove me back to East Berlin that night. And I remember the sun setting and driving back to East Berlin, and I was thinking about things. And I get to the hotel lobby, and there's this woman there. And, you know, I'm kind of like, she looks like she's waiting for me. And sure enough, she was. And we start talking. And she's telling me that she's the wife of the conductor of the Leipzig Symphony. And he's having his last performance in Eastern Germany during the time when our mission is going to be coming out. You know, we already knew when the mission was going to be. It was going to be 2 months later. I had to go back and recruit everybody. She goes, would our companies like to get tickets for this? She can make sure we get tickets. So I run up and I call the front office up in my hotel room. They're like, I said, you know, there's something, I don't know. She's just like showed up. And they're like, well, that sounds like a good opportunity. Keep your eyes open, but do it. And so I confirmed that. And then the mission takes place. We go, and this is a phenomenal performance. Kurt Masur makes his last performance in Berlin, East Berlin. And he winds up going to the U.S., by the way. And everybody leaves. And this woman shows up at the hotel. And I'm closing up shop and getting ready to go back to the States. And she's asking me for all this information about the companies that were on the mission. And there's no way I was going to, you know, give it to her. And then she was sort of implying that she didn't really have much to do, and maybe there was, you know, something she could do for me. And I was like, no, I don't think so. So fast forward, years later, I find out her name was Bridget Masur. She was the first wife of Kurt Masur. They divorced, and she was a Stasi agent. And somebody probably in Dresden told her to come find out what they could about this American mission. And she was just doing what she was told. And the KGB agent in Dresden was named Putin. That was his last, you know, that was his last posting before heading back to St. Petersburg. And, you know, I kind of put this together years later, but I was thinking, well, this is how corrupt people operate. This is how they do what they do. And Lord forbid you fall into their trap, because it's not going to be a good place to hang out. But they are always trying. So, you know, that has always been something I've kept in the back of my mind, that, you know, as Americans, we just don't imagine there's such desperation and ridiculousness, but it is there. It's out there. And we just have to be careful not to fall into what they're trying, the traps they're setting.
Right. So
yeah.
How'd you get a piece of the Berlin Wall?
Well, on weekends, I was free, and I would go and walk over, and there were people that were renting out hammer and chisels, you know, to go chop off part of the wall. And so, you know, 5 Deutschmark, and you could have your tools and chop off stuff. So I was able to do that and got a couple pieces of the Berlin Wall. Have them to this day.
Wow.
Yeah, it was an incredible time. I mean, East Germans were so excited, and I want to also mention, you know, everyone in the U.S. maybe has heard about this alt-right party in Germany. They just won 20% of the vote in recent national election. They are all coming from Dresden and Leipzig. This is coming from the eastern part of Germany. The West doesn't have that kind of proclivity, but these other parts of Eastern Germany, they remain discontent, and they haven't integrated very well into Germany. And this is where this alt-right movement in Germany is coming from. And, you know, I think it's a big problem, and it's a big concern. And I wish it wasn't, you know, that. But to me, having visited so many companies in Eastern Germany and see what a miserable existence they had. And I mean, their products weren't even close to world class. You know, they were so far behind. And for us to go back to that, or for anybody to think that fascism or alt-right, you know, movements are going to be an answer, it's just not. It's not. It's in free you know, capitalism and freedom and individuals being empowered to do what they do best. And it's not having central control.
All right. Any message for the free world before we log off here?
Well, I love the concept that that, you know, societies and economies should be powered by the people in them. To me, I think that's an enlightened view, and you know, I wish you great success in the future, networking and bringing people to this platform to talk about these themes. You know, they really are the big story of our lives right now. I mean, this is like I said, I think you have an enlightened approach, and keep it up.